Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into literally the architectural blueprint of India's governance. We're going to look at exactly how a set of foundational rules was transformed into a vibrant, functioning nation. Think of this as looking at the ultimate master plan for the world's largest democracy.
But, before we get bogged down in the heavy legal framework, let's just start with a super simple concept. Think about your school or your workplace for a second. Imagine if everyone just made up their own schedule every single day. Absolute chaos, right? Following basic rules ensures smooth functioning. It keeps things disciplined, and it just makes sure everyone knows what to expect. Now, take that exact same logic and apply it on a massive national scale. A country needs a similar but obviously much more comprehensive framework to survive and thrive. And well, that brings us directly to the definition of a constitution. It's essentially the ultimate rulebook. It's an active system of basic principles and laws that a government actually follows to run a country. It sets the boundaries for the administration and provides the absolute baseline for the governance of the nation. It's a living document that actively protects you and everyone around you.
So here's our blueprint for today's explainer. First, the Supreme Law of India. Second, unpacking the preamble. Third, the 6 fundamental rights. Fourth, duties and directives. And finally, the democratic framework. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Supreme Law of India, the true foundation of a nation.
To really understand the Constitution, we've got to ground ourselves in just a little bit of history. So, India won its freedom from British colonial rule on August 15, 1947. But it actually wasn't until a few years later that the nation truly codified its own destiny. India brought its constitution into effect on January 26, 1950. And this date is so significant that it's celebrated every single year as Republic Day.
The sheer volume of what was created back then is just staggering. Looking at the handwritten notes from our source material, as of October 2021, it boasts 448 articles, 25 parts, 12 schedules, 5 appendices, and 105 amendments. Because of this massive scope, the Constitution of India actually holds the record as the longest written constitution in the entire world.
There's another fascinating note from our source material that perfectly summarizes its authority in just a handful of words, declaring quite simply, Constitution is the supreme law of India. That means no individual, no politician, and no ordinary law can overrule it. Let's move on to Section 2, unpacking the preamble, basically the soul of the document.
This historic text represents the preamble, which is the introduction to the Constitution. It's incredibly important because it explains the exact kind of government the Constituent Assembly planned for India. And crucially, it was entirely based on what the people actually wanted.
So let's dive into this specific text. It boldly resolves to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and republic nation. Every single one of these words was chosen with immense care to really define the character of the newly independent country. And it illustrates some brilliant promises made to the citizens. The preamble guarantees 4 massive pillars for society. First is justice, ensuring fairness across social, economic, and political spheres. Then, liberty, guaranteeing freedom of thought and belief. Equality, ensuring equal status without discrimination for you and everyone around you. And finally, fraternity. Actually, our source material notes that this specific term, fraternity, which emphasizes a sense of brotherhood and national belongingness, was famously suggested by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself.
All right, Section 3, 6 fundamental rights. Let's look at the structural, load-bearing pillars of what citizens are guaranteed.
The Constitution empowers its people with 6 fundamental rights. It starts with equality, meaning everyone stands on the exact same ground regardless of caste, religion, or gender. From equality flows freedom, the right to speak your mind, express yourself, and freely choose your profession. It also throws a protective shield against exploitation, which crucially prohibits forced labor and ensures no child below 14 is employed in hazardous work. Next up is the freedom of religion, allowing everyone to freely follow their own beliefs. Then we have cultural and educational rights, ensuring communities can preserve their culture and kids receive compulsory education. And finally, the right to constitutional remedies. This one is your ultimate safeguard. It means you can actually approach the courts if any of these foundational rights are ever denied to you.
Section 4. Duties and directives. Because, a functional society is always a two-way street.
Now, the really crucial point of contrast here is the difference in enforceability. While the fundamental rights we just discussed can be actively defended in a courtroom, meaning they are enforced by law, directive principles of state policy are different.
They are essentially important guidelines for the government to make welfare policies, but they are not enforced by law. You can't just sue the government for not immediately achieving them.
And get this, there's a fantastic little handwritten note captured in our source material. It reveals that the concept of these directive principles was actually borrowed from Ireland. It really highlights how the framers of the Indian Constitution studied the entire globe to bring the absolute best ideas together into one single document.
So what do these non-enforceable directives actually look like in practice? Well, they guide the state to act as a welfare government. They instruct the government to ensure good living conditions, provide equal wages for an equal amount of work, and offer free compulsory education for kids up to 14. They also direct the government to preserve historical monuments, like the magnificent Taj Mahal, along with wildlife, and to actively promote international peace and security.
But in return for their protected rights, citizens owe fundamental duties to their country and community. These are your everyday responsibilities. It means actively abiding by the law, respecting the national flag and anthem, treating your neighbors equally, and standing ready to defend the country in times of danger. It also involves taking personal responsibility to protect the natural environment and making a firm commitment to never engage in violence.
Finally, Section 5, the Democratic Framework. Let's step back and look at the finished house. You might remember from the preamble earlier that India is a republic, but what does that practically mean? Well, a republic is simply a country ruled by an elected head. There is no hereditary monarch. The power to choose the leader rests entirely in the hands of the people. And this democratic form of government thrives on a few very specific, basic features. Leaders are elected directly by the citizens. Every single adult citizen is granted the right to vote. And most importantly, bringing us right back full circle to our starting point, the elected rulers of the country are strictly bound by the constitutional laws and must always acknowledge the fundamental rights of the citizens we explored earlier.
But before we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought from our sources. The Constitution explicitly states that the government can temporarily suspend those undeniable fundamental rights during a state of emergency or crisis, like a war with a foreign nation. So it leaves us with this difficult, profound question. How does a massive democracy perfectly balance the preservation of individual freedom with the necessary security of the entire nation? Think about that for a bit as you reflect on the incredible blueprint we've uncovered today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.